Hey people, this is Wakia, aka Thunder, aka Holy Wind Warrior, aka who is that son of a bitch? And where did he get that hair all of a sudden? No, it's mine. No, it's not a wig. I do let it down sometimes. Actually, I just cut it. It was down to my waist. Got a little tough combing it out. Give Wild Bill Hickok a run for his money, huh? Or maybe Crazy Horse. No, I think he probably had longer hair. Some of the Apaches now, they usually wore their hair right about here. Mine's a little longer, maybe here. Sometimes I wear it down just to prove people that, yeah, I do have, Thunder does have long hair. It runs in the family. Anyway, you should see my sons. I thought I'd talk about, I don't know, storytelling. I'm writing a novel right now called Kid, about the Apache Kid, and kind of reviewing some of the stuff about the Apache people. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in Arizona. I was actually not born there, but brought there at about the tender age of, I'd say 4 months old, 5 months old. So it's like being born there, and I did a lot of roaming around when I was a kid, tracking, okay, and back then that was kind of like the early days of Arizona, or just after the early days. I guess you could say around the 19 let's put it this way, it was still the West when I was a kid, basically. So I roamed around with my dog Misty, which was a blue Merle collie, looked like a wolf, and most of the time I would be alone, but a lot of times I'd be with my friend Bob or Robert. We'd hang out together, and we'd roam all over the land, from the Superstition Mountains to the South Mountains to Squaw Peak to Camelback Mountain, Sunny Slope, Black Canyon, Canyon Lake, Apache Trail, all over. And most of the time we were just hiking around. You know, some of the times we'd track coyotes and look for snakes and camp out, you know, campfire with the can of beans and whatever you could rustle up, and we'd throw our knives, and once in a while we'd take the bow out and do some hunting with that. And mostly it was just knives back then. I wasn't old enough to have a firearm yet, although my dad had one. Anyway, it was just a little background. You know, I lived in a little red brick house right next to the desert. There was a canal nearby, and all the canals in Phoenix, or in what was originally Fort McDowell, Arizona, were built by the Hohokam Indians. And there was, the spirit of the Indian was all over the land. Not my tribe, but the tribes that I became familiar with mostly were the Hopi and the Apache and the Navajo. Kind of got adopted into a couple of families of those people. And I did a lot of traveling up to northern Arizona and down to Tucson by the Dragoons and just all over. And so when I write about the Apache, or when I do research for a book, it almost, I'm living it, basically, because I know all the places that they talk about. Plus, I've been in most of the places and talked to a lot of the tribal people about some of those places. Some were my friends, and again, more like family. The Apache people were a hardy people, vigorous people, a warrior people. They were probably the ultimate guerrilla fighters, and they were proficient in all forms of combat. They could use the new repeating rifles, or they used their bow and arrows, or they used their knives, and they had a special form of hand-to-hand combat, kind of a secretive thing. And I really like the characters in history in the Old West, and the whole thing surrounding that area and those people. There were so many great Apaches like Cochise, and who was one of the greatest chiefs that ever lived. And then you had Nana, N-A-N-A, Nana, who was a great chief. I think he was White Mountain. Man, you know what? I forget more things than most people would ever know. And I still know a lot. But so we had Nana, and we had guys like Degoluche and Katane, and who was a great warrior, who was married to Goyan, who was a warrior woman, who I talked about before, who crept into a camp. Katane was her second husband. Her first husband got killed by, I think it was Comanches. She crept into the chief's camp and seduced him, and then during that process she either cut his throat or ripped it out with her teeth. Basically took his life and his clothes and his everything that he owned, his knife, brought it back to her tribe as a gift. But anyway, I get off on a tangent there. But some of the women were awesome warriors. Lo Zen, who I've talked about often, was a beautiful spirit woman warrior who had a way with horses, and she also was very psychic, like most of the medicine people in the tribes were. And if you lived out in the land and communed with the spirits of nature, you were basically, you had that power. Okay. Indagehogate, or Ogati, however you want to say it. I'm not an authority on the language. That's one of the hardest languages there is. But anyway, Lo Zen could tell where the enemy was coming from by just holding out her arms in front of her and circling around. She could say, oh yeah, there's 18 blue coats coming and they're 20 miles away and they'll be here in about, And she usually was with her brother Victorio. Every raid that he went on, he took Lo Zen with him. Now, the one time he didn't take her, she was delivering a baby. She was like a midwife too, and she was delivering someone's baby, and in the bushes yet, another Apache woman. So she had to stay behind. So the one time he didn't take her, with him, because she went, like I said, she went on all the raids with Vittorio and Geronimo. And she was a beautiful woman too, by all accounts. Kind of, more on the muscled, lean side. Not like anything you'd see in Victoria's Secrets or anything. But anyway, the one time that he didn't take her, he got killed. He got trapped in a canyon by the Bluecoats, and so rather than get captured, he took his own life. I think he cut his throat or something like that. That was the usual method. Either that, or he put a gun to his head. He just didn't want to live with the White Eyes. Now, you also had, like I said, you had Nana, who rode in the saddle till in his 80s, and Degalucci, but Nana rode in the saddle till his 80s and fought as a warrior. And believe me, when you ride in the saddle and sleep in the saddle, and those guys were constantly on the run. And they'd cache weapons and food and water in different caves. Stash guns, and they never went down to the communities like Tombstone or Tucson, they were always up in the mountains, and they traveled on the high trails, or they traveled the back trails. And they basically just wanted to stay out of harm's way. Now, a lot of times these people would get sent to reservations. The government was really stupid. Instead of letting these people live where they wanted to in peace, they would say, no, you're going to live in some goddamn harsh reservation out in San Carlos where there's bugs and mosquitoes and 110-degree heat, and that's where you're going to live. Doesn't matter if you were used to living in between a beautiful canyon area with waterfalls and hidden back in the mountains. No, we want to go back there, and we want to mine back there. We want to dig that yellow gold, that yellow metal out of there, and pollute the streams. And so they took these people and stuck them on reservations like San Carlos and Turkey Creek, and they didn't like it, and Geronimo didn't. Nobody that was a warrior liked it, and so consequently, they were constantly leaving and coming back, or getting caught, surrendering, and leaving again, because there wasn't really any walls or anything. It wasn't a prison, it was a reservation. So Geronimo left numerous times, and one time he even took Loco and his people. Loco is another famous Apache. Even against their will sometimes, because he said, I know what's better for you than you do, because you're succumbing to the white man's ways. Now, there could be argument about this, but Geronimo did what he thought was best. Let's not forget he was persecuted and tortured, and his wife and kids and mother were all killed by Mexicans. So he didn't have a real good outlook as far as the Mexican people, and that was mainly the people that he was at war with. But it was a cross-border thing. All kinds of shit was going on down there. I mean, you had the Mexicans that hated the Apaches, and then you had the Apaches that hated the Mexicans. But yet they would capture some Mexicans and raise them, and a lot of times they'd take Mexican women as wives. Sometimes they'd take white guys, white kids, and raise them as Apaches. Okay. Mickey Free was a person that will pop up numerous times, sometimes traitorous, bitter. Although he was raised Apache, he hated him sometimes, and then other times he was like, oh yeah, I'm Apache. So, and he was one of the guys that was used as an interpreter, and I was talking about this the other day, how interpreters got people in trouble because they wouldn't give the correct interpretation. If they wanted to give an interpretation that would put people at odds with one another, that's what they'd do. So you never knew if, you know, your interpreters were telling you the truth. This leads me to another thing about the scouts, the Apache scouts, the ones that work for the Bluecoats. I know I'm jumping around here, but if it's storytelling, I'm just sitting here telling stories. You can get out of it what you want. So the Apache scout, most of the time, got to give you a little insight on this. Well, they betrayed their people. Well, yeah, they did. But, so, you know, when you were in a position of like, okay, if you want a horse and your gun, which they prized highly, in fact, they figured they weren't a warrior unless they had a horse and a gun, for the most part, when horses and guns were in vogue. And so they'd hire these great, you know, Apache scouts as trackers. Now that's what happened with the Apache Kid. He was captured by Yuma Indians, and then Al Sieber, who was a white chief of scouts, happened to find him, rescue him. At least in his mind, he thought he was rescuing him. Because the kid was really basically already, I think he was already free living around the Globe area up near the Aravapai Canyon and San Carlos and up in that area. He was born there. But he took the kid, who was really a kid, and made him kind of a gopher. Go for this, go for that. And if you do this, I'll teach you this and teach you that. And then next thing you know, it was like he was a scout. Well, he was already Apache and already a good tracker and already raised as a warrior. And he was a keen, he had the power, he had the ESP, he had the gift from Usen, who was their god, by the way, Usen, U-S-E-N. So he got taken under Al Siebert's wing as a scout and raised that way. Later on, he had mixed feelings about it, especially when they turned against him. And again, when you were an Apache, you would almost do anything to keep your horse and weapon, and on top of it, you would get paid, and that would help with raising the family. If you got a little stipend at the end of the month, and if you got access to the some of the food and other things that they would bring in to the trading post there, you had certain privileges that made it worthwhile to be a scout. You got to understand the Apache mindset. They didn't really think of themselves as traders. They really just thought of themselves as warriors. Because certain bands of Apaches would already, not all of them got along. They would have their intertribal or skirmishes and stuff like that. So they basically thought their mindset was more, how can I be a warrior? How can I use my skills? How can I track? How can I hunt? How can I... And to them, the white man was just like another tribe or another band. Until it started really getting serious. Now, the other thing about the scout was that they were in the end, when they shipped Geronimo, or Goyafle was his real name. When they shipped him off with Lausanne and all the rest of them to the calaboose, or the prisons in Florida, Guess who went with him? All the scouts that tracked him and all the scouts that, helped track Geronimo. They stripped him. They stripped him of their rank, and they stripped him with their guns and everything and said, "You're fired. Thanks for serving us. We'll see you later." And they sent him off to prison. Nice of them, wasn't it? Thanks for serving the United States military. So, in the end, a lot of these scouts were hated, never talked to again, even in the prisons. And then you had Masai, who jumped train on the way to, and he hooked up with the Apache Kid, or he was just basically known as Kid. Okay, not the Kid or Apache Kid, but just Kid. They teamed up and did a lot of raids and stuff. They never got caught, ever. They probably retired down in some hacienda in Mexico with one of their squaws. Lived a good life. They were the supreme trackers, the supreme hunters, the supreme evaders, and they never got caught, and they never surrendered. And yes, they did kill some people, but it was more or less out of self-defense or just plain outright survival. And what did they care at that point? They'd been branded by the white eyes and the cavalry and the townspeople as the most heinous outlaws and criminals. Even, their legend was bigger than the actual fact. They didn't really. It isn't really proven that the Apache Kid killed anybody. I mean, they found moccasins, and they found this, and they found that. They saw him on occasion with different squaws, and they saw him doing this and that, but they never really... I don't think anybody lived to tell about it, to be truthful with you. If they came across the Apache Kid, we know that he let some people go, like old prospectors and stuff. He let them into his camp, and share his, coffee or whatever with them, and they'd share tobacco or whatever. But he was a supreme warrior and outlaw, branded as an outlaw. Now, if it would have gone just a slightly different way, and Al Siebert, who was his chief, hadn't testified falsely against him, he might have been a hero of the Old West instead of a outlaw. Very thin line back then. It's like some of the lawmen were either heroes or outlaws, depending on which way the wind blew. I love that era. I love talking about this stuff. It's in my heart, it's in my blood, it takes me right back to the arid zone, or Arizona. So I love talking about it, telling a few stories to you. There's so many stories I could tell. It would take 3, 4, 5 hours about the Apache and how Geronimo got his name Geronimo, and the cut the tent thing with Cochise, how they betrayed him, and then there was Mangus Colorado, who was a great chief who tried to make peace, and he was a big man, huge. Almost didn't look like he was Apache, because Apaches were generally smaller, more lean, well built. He was big guy. He had a big head, big body, huge actually, of great stature. And when he went in to make peace, and when he went in to parley with some of the people he thought would treat him right, he was warned against it by his own tribe and his friends and everything. But they ended up tying him up and shooting him, and Eventually they cut off his head because it was so big, and they boiled it in a pot and sent the skull off to the Smithsonian or something to study it. Wasn't that nice? And that just incensed the Apache people. And, you know, truth be known, I think they stole Geronimo's skull from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Guess who did that? Prescott Bush. Okay? And where do you think it ended up? The Skull and Bones Society. So we got all kinds of just heinous things that were done to the Apache people, and they go, oh, well, the Apaches were so bad, they scalped people and they tortured people, and yeah, they did. They didn't scalp people. They tortured people. They might have scalped people occasionally. You know who invented scalping? Mexicans. Okay, they were the first ones to offer a bounty for men, women, and children. I think it was, $150, $100 for a man, and $75 for a woman, and $50 for a kid. And they didn't care. How are they going to tell? They didn't have DNA back then. People would bring in all kinds of scalps, as long as it had black hair. And bounty hunters had come up from Texas and Comancheros and do their dastardly deeds, bringing in scalps and stuff, getting paid. Of course the Apache retaliated. They got booted out of their land. They got their wives raped and their babies killed, and all kinds of things done to them. But guess what? As one Apache would put it so well, they did that to us, so we did it to them, only we did it better than they did. And they did. Once they got in gear, once they saw the writing on the wall, they pulled out all the stops as far as torture and all that stuff. You didn't want to get caught by an Apache. Okay, if you were a White Eyes or a miner or a blue coat, got caught off somewhere, unless they took a liking to you, which sometimes they would. I mean, Geronimo actually liked the first white men that he met, some surveyors that were laying out borders between Mexico, and he got along with them real well. It wasn't until later that everything went south. But oh yeah, I mean, they'd do things like, you know, they'd burn you alive if they caught you, stick arrows in you, smash your head with stones, and laugh about it, you know. Got to remember, these people were raised as severe hunters, you know, and I mean, hell, they'd make the kids run up to the top of the mountain with water in their mouth, you know, and they'd have to hold it in their mouth and breathe through their nose and run clear up to the top of some mountain and back down again. Then they'd throw them in a cold stream or a frozen stream, tell them to swim out, and then throw them in again. And they taught them how to run all over the place. The best friend to an Apache was his legs. And they could run 80 miles in a 110-degree sun. Try that sometime. And they had powers, and they were one with the land, and they were one with the Gon, which are the spirits, the mountain spirits. So these people lived next to the land. They were part of the land. And they were Athabascan people that came down from up north, in the cold country. Talk about adapting. A lot of people, a lot of other tribes didn't like the Apaches. So what? Now, let's see. Where should I go from here? Maybe I should just end this video. But I just wanted to come on here and story tell today, do a little storytelling, talk about my background. And I'm actually Métis, which is from the East, which is a mixture of French and Indian. And but I have the spirit of the Apache and Navajo and some of the other tribes, because I visited their sacred mounds, and I, like I say, I hiked the Apache Trail, and I lived and communed with the same spirits they did, and probably their spirits too. And I saw the writings and the pictographs, and I had visions when I was a kid. Naturally, just who knows why. Chosen, I guess. I didn't know what was going on with me, and neither did my parents. They actually really did take me to have my head examined as a kid, you know, with the electrocephalograph, see if anything was wrong. No, but I still had my visions, and they couldn't find a damn thing wrong with me, and said I was fine. But I still continued having visions and high fevers and all kinds of things. That might have started when I had that little encounter with the thunder and lightning, which is another story all in itself, save for another time. Kind of appropriate they call me Thunder. Anyway, I guess I'll leave it there today. I'm rambling on. I don't even know if I'll release this, but at least I can say hi to my friends out there, Fozzie and Natalie and Down to Earth and the whole crew. Still watching this Russian thing. Gotta laugh sometimes at the shit that goes on. Let's hope we're around in another year or two. Anyway, I'll leave it there today. Walk the red road. Connect with Great Spirit. And, oh, by the way, Apaches usually spoke Spanish too, so I'll say adios.